What's up, Tecumseh, you consummate justification for grinning until my cheeks hurt? Welcome to the Tecumseh Bicentennial Podcast. My name is Benjamin J Nichols, but you can call me Gas Station Beats. In today's episode, we'll be talking with longtime resident and saxophone ninja, Eric Korte. I've also prepared a special piece of music for all my gas station enthusiasts, inspired by my conversation with Mayor Jack Baker. We will once again get a bit of history with Bob, but for now, on with the show.
My name is Eric Korte.
Is there any way that anybody who's listening might know
Well,
you?
I think, one, I was born in Tecumseh many years ago, and I do play the saxophone, and I've played it around town and around the state and around the country for many years. So many times I'll be in a grocery store and someone will come up to me and say, "Are you that saxophone guy?" And I'll have to say yes.
And say, no, I play the sousaphone.
Sometimes I do say some funny stuff, at least in my thoughts.
I think it's funny, and I'm for it. What is something about you that is not a secret, but perhaps most people do not know?
Bill Clinton actually played my saxophone once. In Ann Arbor, we played a rally, and he jumped on stage and he tooted my horn. And then one time I met him again, and he asked me the serial number, and I gave him my serial number, and he went, "That saxophone was made in 1981. And I was like, whoa, he's smart. Whatever you want to say about him, that was pretty amazing. And the other thing is, pretty much every night, my ritual to go to sleep is I sing karaoke.
Just by yourself?
Just by myself.
Do you load up karaoke tracks?
Just like on YouTube.
Oh, outstanding.
And as you know that I'm not a good singer, but I try.
And now we have a tip for anybody that can't sleep. Give that a try. Maybe it'll work for somebody else.
And then all the neighbors can't sleep, much less the dogs.
Fun bonus. Yeah. What hobbies do you have? I guess,
music is a hobby, even though I do play for some compensation. I think the hobbies that I have is I really try to learn a lot about the things that interest my kids. So, for instance, my son is into filmmaking, so I try to avail myself of that. And I was noticing, like on YouTube, everybody's driving. This is like American show. And they're driving on the steering wheels on the right. And I went, I think I know what that's about. And so I called my son, and he told me the whole thing and how it messes with the algorithm on YouTube. It doesn't get taken down, so there's no copyright infringement. And then he explained to me how they do that electronically. They can just hit a button where, 20 years ago, you'd have to actually flip the film upside down.
Now it's just a little button that says flip horizontal.
Sometimes they stretch it and do different things.
If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
I think the superpower is I'd want to control electricity.
You want to expand on that?
When you think about this podcast, the lights, the air conditioning or the heat in this building, a car, if you could control that, anything that has electricity, you have a lot of power.
That's a fact.
You just turn somebody off or turn somebody on.
So, what superpower did you get stuck with?
I think the superpower I got stuck with is I don't have a filter, I don't think. So, as the Vox would know, I can come up with a retort very quickly. And I think that playing music, I think I've kind of developed that. So, if one musician plays something, I can react to it very quickly. But certainly in regular life, it has gotten me into trouble at times.
Yeah, it's like you're always picking fights.
That's right. Many times I go, I can't believe I just said that.
Many times I go, I can't believe you just said that. Tell me a story you plan on telling your grandkids.
I love a lot of the stories that my grandpas told me. So, for instance, jokes. They're not great jokes, but they told them so many times. They became great jokes. So, like, we'd always go by a cemetery, and I'd say, how many people are in there? And I'd say, I don't know. And he would say, all of them. And why do they build a fence? Because people are dying to get in. Those kind of jokes. And I love taking my memories of the past, of people that were important to me, and trying to pass them on. But it's not difficult. People don't like to hear the old stories as much anymore for some reason.
What inspires you personally?
I think to make up for my quick retorts that sometimes may hurt some feelings, I try to be really nice to people as much as I can. and listen to people and try to learn from them and try to be on the lookout, for people who, might need something, even if it's just somebody to talk to for a little bit.
What do you passionately care about?
I think it would be faith, family, and friends. I think that's what I would say. And I'm going to stick to that.
It's good. It's sticky. I love that your hobby is learning about things that your kids care about. That I think was lovely. And I think it supports what you just said. Faith, family, and friends. First thing that comes to your mind, if I say, what is your favorite memory in or involving Tecumseh? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
The Sesquicentennial. And that was obviously 50 years ago.
I like that you say obviously, because everybody knows what sesquicentennial means.
Sesquicentennial was 150. So we're at the 200th this year, and 150 was in 1974. I was 7, and it really, to see all the things that went on, all the fun that went on, people grew beards, and people didn't have beards. At least, unless you were a hippie, normal people. Used air quotes there.
You missed the air quotes, but they were there.
Grew beards and wore, top hats and straw hats and bolo ties. And it was just a lot of fun. And my grandpa was kind of one of the leaders then. And I was just thinking about it. He was actually a little younger during that year than I am now. He was like 56 and I'm 57. So I'm going, holy moly. I mean, they played softball games and they were in parades and did fundraisers and picnics and all kinds of things that whole year.
Finish this sentence. I remember when
I was younger. And sometimes I try to go back in time and try to remember my goals, dreams, values, and try to compare and contrast my younger self to my current self. And which things have I changed for the good? And which things have I changed maybe not for the good? Maybe something I should go back and think about the world the way I did back then. So I'm kind of a person that likes to do self-evaluation, I guess.
How did you view the world when you were younger that you would perhaps adopt now and go back to?
I think back then I was really focused on, playing my saxophone and becoming a good saxophone player. And I think that has changed in that I've tried to become a better musician. So back then, I would not buy a record or tape or whatever that didn't have a saxophone on it. So it was jazz, it was big band, it was some rock, soul music and things like that had horns in it. So things like country and heavy metal was coming on when I was in high school, I didn't listen to. But disco had tons of horns. So I listened to that. And now I've kind of gone back to, well, how can a saxophone fit into these different genres? Or just appreciate different genres?
Eric is friends with our mayor, Jack Baker, and told me that I should ask him about Tecumseh's gas stations. I did not know what I was expecting, but it certainly was not a virtual tour of our town with stops at almost all the gas stations from several years ago. I noticed Jack's recitation was a bit rhythmic and had a nice flow to it, so I added some music. Enjoy.
We're Bailey's Water Care. That's a Citgo station. Building just south of him, which is, I think Randy Plummer is in there, the accountant. That was a Texaco station. Long Motor Sale. That was a golf station. You go further north on Evans, and when you cross the bridge, just north of the church, on the left, I believe it's a hair stylist. That was not a gas station, but it was like what you would call today a convenience store. And a fellow by the name of Eddie Clark had, and he had gas pumps out front. You go a little further north, where Dollar General stands, was Bolden's grocery store, and Bolden's grocery store was run off the front porch of their house. But they also had gas. And I can remember the brand as clear as can be. Bolden sold Phillips 66. Now, you don't see those around here in Michigan. You'll run into them out west, out in the Plain States. but not in the Midwest, not here. And they had Phillips 66, and you actually would fill your car up from the street. The pump was right at the curb. And we had a lot of locations like that in town. Whelan's, John Deere dealership, when they were still over on Logan Street, they sold gasoline, and their gas was right at the curb. Pumps were right there. And getting back to Evans, when you would continue on north, when you get to Carrick Park Drive, which went to the right, Brown Street goes to the left, the building still stands. That was a Standard Oil station. So just in those few short blocks, there's like 5 or 6 right there. And that's just there, you know, coming in from the east on M50, the first station you would run into, and that building still stands. And Scott Campbell has an insurance business in there. That was a Gulf gas station. And if you look today, if you look where the speed limit sign is in front of that location, you'll see the base, which is still in the ground with 4 bolts sticking. That was the base for the Gulf oil sign. It still is there. Not the sign, base. Across the street, the building that Illinois Fuels owns, Perky Pantry, TJ Wagner had a car dealership in there, and it was Jim's High Flat, and they sold gasoline. And if you went a little further to the west, on the southeast corner of Moline Street and Boulevard, which is where Cal Tuttle is in part of that building now, the chiropractor, that was a Sunoco station. If you turned left on Maumee at that section and you went all the way down to Russell Road, there was Ed's Discount. And that was a gas station. And that building still stands today, and it's a detail shop. Now let's come back north and get back on the boulevard. So now we're going to head further downtown. So when you get to Ottawa Street, there were 2 stations on that corner. One of the buildings still stands. That building is Gregory's Barbershop. That was a Standard Oil station. That is the building that was built. That was the office for that. There was no garage attached to it. There was an outdoor lit just to the north of the building. And so I can remember being in the car with my father coming up Ottawa Street in the middle of winter, and you would see men out there in their coveralls, their hats and gloves and things on, working on cars, changing oil, changing tires, things like that, right on the weather. So kitty corner from that station was a mobile station. That's where the depot is now. That was a mobile station. Went a little further west, on the right-hand side where Martin's Home Center is, that was Charlie Butler's Ford dealership. And he sold gas on the corner of Parade and Blue. Right across from that was my station, which prior to that was Harold Easton Station. East of that, that was a pure oil station. Charlie Howe had that station. If you went north on Pearl Street from the boulevard, right on the corner, there's a veterinarian in there now. That was a Fleetling. A Buckmeter hit that station. Back on the boulevard, heading west a little further, right next to CVS, there was a car wash, and he sold it. And that's been years ago. A little further to the west, where Walgreens is right now, there was a mobile gas station. If you went south on Occidental to where George's Market used to be, on the corner of Occidental and Russell, and now it's Jerry's Express, I believe, he sold gas. And if you turned left and went back on Russell, headed east, where the Pilot convenience store is, that was a Sinclair station. Where Gary's Quick Lube is, a fellow by the name of Henry Newland started that car wash, and he sold Sinclair gas. So when you pull around back to go into the car wash bays, there was a pump at every bed, and he sold a lot of gas there. Henry sold a lot of gas there.
Do you have any memories involving a Tecumseh Park?
One park that I think is, it's really never been utilized, but when it was first built, Hotram,
Or Hot Rum.
I call it Hot Rum Park. My sister got married there, and I played, the wedding march and stuff on my saxophone there. That's the thing about when you've lived in a town like your whole life. You're going by parks, and, I played baseball there or softball there, or I got my vanilla, or there used to be a clothing store called Greens. There was like a basement. You'd go down there, and that's where I got my first Cub Scout uniform. And there was a guy that played football, went to school with my dad and uncles, and he'd always say, "So which Korte are you?" Rogers, my dad. Oh, boy, he was a heck of a football player. He used to beat me up so bad.
I'm going to take it out on you.
That's double price for you.
Yeah, never want to hear that.
Right.
He just beat me up. Oh, crap. Do you have any memories involving a Tecumseh school?
Until in fourth grade, I went to Clinton. And then in the middle of fourth grade, we moved to the Tecumseh School District. So I went to Sutton Elementary on Sutton Road. It's right next to the Milton Porter Center. In that elementary school back then, there were 2 classes of hearing impaired kids and 1 class of kids in wheelchairs. My first girlfriend, she was in a wheelchair, and her name was Mary Beth, and I'd get her, and I thought she was so cute, and I'd bring her down for our spelling tests and stuff like that and take her back. Back then, it was boys' gym and girls' gym. So when we had boys' gym, the boys that were hearing impaired came down. So I had a lot of friends that were special needs. So I think it really gave me kind of a good perspective on that. And then one boy, now a man, ended up working with him at Hidden Lake Gardens when I was working, summers going through school. And because I had that ability to communicate with him, we teamed up and worked together. And it was great.
What hopes do you have for the future of Tecumseh?
So certainly the old Tecumseh site. I hope something will go into that.
Can you clarify that old Tecumseh site?
The old Tecumseh Products site, sorry. So that's south of town. I remember when at 3:30, I think it was, when that whistle blew and the first shift was going off and second shift was coming on, it literally stopped the town. The whole town was a traffic jam. And back then, because there was so much traffic at those times of day, they had changed a lot of the streets to one way to try to alleviate that. And then like in the 80s, they made those streets back to two-way, but it was really the lifeblood of town. So anytime I see old buildings that aren't being utilized and just are decaying, bums me out. One of my other hobbies or passions, I love barns. So I love to look at barns and study the architecture and just try to look at how the beams were cut, and by how they're cut, you can tell which mill it was, because you could tell if it was a circular saw or a band saw, or were the beams cut with the adze or in those kind of things. You kind of figure out when they were built and what they were built for.
Do you have advice or a message for the people of Tecumseh 100 years from now?
Probably the biggest thing is that I would want to thank them for changing the name to Ericville. Well, that's nice, I'm just wondering, probably the Tecumseh Product site is probably where my museum will be.
With your metal mouthpiece.
My metal mouthpiece. There'll be a picture of me in handcuffs. I think we've talked a lot about, I've talked about buildings and things like that, but it's really the people that make those buildings. I think about the person who would smile kindly when I said Vanilla Illa, and people would, giggle and maybe giving me some extra ice cream. I think about the salesman that when I'd go into Greens, he would talk about, my dad in a really positive way. It's the people. And in 100 years, I know I'm not going to be around. So hopefully the people still have a heart for other people in town.
In today's Bit O' History with Bob, author and local historian Robert Elliott shares a story about a local hero, Raynard Wilson, who gave his last full measure of devotion in Normandy. Prior to that, though, he saved 3 lives in England.
Raynard Wilson. And I found the story, just stumbled by looking through the papers in the day, and it's June of 1944, Normandy. This guy gets killed, and it's not reported, some weeks later. And to go to Normandy, to walk past the Tecumseh guys' graves in Normandy is pretty moving, June 6, 1944, imagine those guys landing on a beach. Imagine if your job description was save the world. Let's put it in perspective. The Nazis had taken over everything. I always like Eisenhower talk about it, and, our 34th president. He's talking about, I don't know if it could be done, but we as Americans, we are the people to do it, So really good stuff. But Rainer Wilson, Army sergeant, and I find out he gets a medal for heroism in non-combat. So it just befuddles me. How did, some general, it sounds like, comes to town and gives his wife Naomi the medal. And so trying to find out the records of what on earth, and it happens in May in 1944. D-Day is, of course, June 6, almost a month later. And finding reports where he was in England, probably on maneuvers, practicing for D-Day, and a British lorry, British truck coming around. You've ever been to England, the little winding, curving one-lane roads and stuff like that. And not really made for big trucks and stuff like that, but this truck goes off the road, catches on fire, and Sergeant Wilson runs out and pulls these 3 little girls out on fire. Yep, saves their lives. So it's a big article over there, in England. But that's a great story.
Are there any questions you wish I would have asked?
How did you become such a great dancer?
That actually was on my list, so lay it on me.
It's funny. I don't dance anymore, but actually as a kid, I think the reason why I got into music is when I was 8. I would put on my dad's stereo and whatever records, he had a lot of the Motown and soul, like the Spinners and things like that, and Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. And I would put on a record, and we had like a 3-season porch. In the winter, it'd be like about 42 degrees in there. And there were speakers out there, and I'd turn it on, and I'd just run around and jump around and dance and really felt the music. In my study of a lot of musicians were actually very good dancers. A lot of drummers. Buddy Rich, Steve Gadd, my favorite 2 drummers, were actually very good tap dancers.
Rumor has it you played for Bill Clinton's inauguration.
Yes. So I was we played, I think, 3 rallies in Tecumseh because I was in a band that was very popular in Michigan. So we played a rally at Michigan State, we played a rally at the University of Michigan, and we played a rally the day before he was elected in 92 in Detroit at Metro Airport. He just flew in, did a speech, and then flew out. And then, so during the inauguration, we were asked to play. So they had something called Music on the Mall. And we played that. There was just all kinds of great bands like Booker T and the MGs, Ravi Coltrane, McCoy Tyner. There's all these I'm missing like a ton of them. And we played too. And so we played on the mall in this huge tent. And we also played at the Hard Rock Cafe for an event. And I met like Miss Universe. I met Tom Cruise's first wife, Mimi Rogers, and the daughter on Roseanne, whatever her name is, Sarah Gilbert. Yeah. All kinds of people like that. Faye Dunaway. And I have pictures with all, so it was very cool. And then also Benny King, who sang Stand By Me, came up and sang with us. And Clarence Clemens from the Bruce Springsteen came up and sang with us. The cool thing about that, the coolest thing, is so we got done playing, and then we went actually to the Lincoln Memorial because there was a big concert there. So it's all just tons, thousands and thousands. It was like amazing amount of people. And we're walking. All of a sudden there was a murmur, and the crowd splits. And walking right towards me is kind of the icon of the 70s. Henry Winkler, the Fonz, was like walking right toward. I said hi, and we kind of like had to move out. So it's like, wow, that's cool. I walked about another 5 minutes. All of a sudden, there was a bigger murmur. And coming at me was this big limousine. And it's like coming right at me. So we're like, this crowd is like, I'm kind of like pushing like to try to get. So I'm like 2 inches, I had to pull my feet back or my feet would have gotten run over by the tires. So the car goes by me and my face is literally, like 8 inches from the window. And going by me was the icon of the 80s, Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson's face, or whatever it was at the time, was 8 inches, and just kind of looking at me waving. I was like, "Wow,
That's awesome.
I just met Henry Winkler and Michael Jackson within minutes of each other."
And I don't know who I'd want to meet more because I actually love them both. So, speaking of Clarence Clemens, didn't you also play with the boss at one point?
Well, at that same time, Max Weinberg, who was the drummer with Bruce Springsteen, was our record company president that we were signed with in that band. It was Benny King, Clarence Clemens, and Max Weinberg played with us, Stand By Me. And I remember, I wanted to take a solo, and I went, Clarence, you could take a solo with this. And he just ripped a great solo, but it was very, very cool because then afterwards I got to talk, just my nickname in that band was Super E. So Max Weinberger coming over and saying, "Hey, Super E, how you doing?" was, strange. But then...
was he wearing a suit?
Yes, he always wears a suit. He's a very button-up guy, but very learned. He actually wrote a book about all the different kinds of the rock and roll drummers and talked about, like Johnny B with Mitch Ryder and, all these different Shelly Manne, like the original drummers that kind of invented rock and roll drumming. So afterwards, I got a chance to go up to Clarence Clemens and said, "Clarence, I want to thank you because I learned your little solo in 10th Avenue Freeze Out where it goes, and the big man joined the band and he plays like a 2-bar solo." And my first band I was auditioning for in Toledo called the Home Wreckers, and I was auditioning and they said, I was like 18 and all these other guys are like 40. They said, "Let's play 10th Avenue Freeze Out." So I go, yeah. So we get to that point, I just completely played it just like Clarence Clemens. And the band stopped and said, "It's over, you're in the band." So I got the chance to thank Clarence Clemens for getting me my first gig.
That's going to do it for today's episode. Tecumseh, you are delightful and kind. Come back tomorrow when we talk with Gina Nowak of G&J's Frosty Boy of Tecumseh. In fact, maybe plan on getting some ice cream and listening to the podcast over a vanilla illicone. Okay,